right, well, you mentioned China trade, and I'd love to just get there because we heard from Ambassador Lighthizer yesterday. There does seem to be a positive tone, Larry. What is your sense as to the likelihood that there is going to be an agreement reached, something even potentially signed in the not-too-distant future between the U.S. and China?
Well, look, we're moving forward on it. Moving forward, the progress last week was fantastic. And really looking at the pages, looking at the documents, whether it's all the structural issues, IP theft and forced technology transfers and ownership, and we're making great headway on non-tariff barriers and tariffs regarding, various commodities such as soybeans and energy and beef and whatnot. We have a mechanism with respect to enforcement, which is, I think, unparalleled, to be honest. I think Bob Lighthizer has just done a tremendous job. When we had the Chinese over last week, the first day of the deputies' meetings went very poorly, and the second day was canceled because of that. And then the principals met, the plenary session. I was there, led by Lighthizer, read them the Riot Act. And Vice Premier Liu He was the leader of the Chinese side, responded. And all of a sudden, everything picked up. And so we had line-by-line discussions on Thursday and Friday, and then it was extended to Saturday and Sunday. So I have to tell you, the progress has been terrific. We have to hear from the Chinese side. We have to hear from President Xi and his Politburo, of course. But I think we're heading towards a remarkable historic deal. That's what it looks like to me. We still have to get their sign-off. That's important.
Yeah.
But I think we're heading for a historic deal.
And what about this idea that has certainly been reported on that there is, light between Lighthizer and the president in terms of their view here, and that the president might be willing to accept a deal that Mr. Lighthizer, who made it clear in his testimony yesterday, would not necessarily favor, because it would be more about removing tariffs and or money coming back and forth, if you want to call it that, as opposed to the real structural changes that need to take place.
I just said, look, the structural changes are there. I mean, again, the tech transfers, the IP theft, the issue of ownership. The joint venture ownership is really the key to the transfers. And the Chinese have gone forward on this. We're going to see an across the board, especially financial services. But American companies will be able to own American companies for a change. And that takes away most of the issues regarding the forced transfer. As far as daylight between President Trump and Mr. Lighthizer, I think that's just untrue. I just think that's completely untrue. I know people reported. I was in the Oval Office when we decided that memorandum of understanding worked in trade, but not for real estate, so we don't use that term anymore, and we're now using trade deals or the word contract. Mr. Lighthizer talks to the president every day. He wouldn't have made this deal if the president weren't signing off on it. So I want to just put these rumors to rest. Bob Lighthizer has done a terrific job. He's the best trade lawyer in the business. And President Trump is very close to him, and I think we're all fortunate. Look, again, the Chinese side has to come back and agree. I believe they will, and I believe there'll be a meeting in late March down in Mar-a-Lago. But we have to wait for their decision. But let me just say, Mr. Lighthizer, for my money, and I'm the free trader in the building, he has worked miracles on this Chinese deal. We've never, ever come this far with China trade. And again, the outlook for a deal is very positive.
Wow, Larry, it's Jim. That's much stronger than I've heard yet, and I think it's kind of monumental. Does this mean that you introduced me to Peter Navarro? We're friends, I admit that. I've been where he is for a long time. Is there any way that the Chinese can, let's say, back away from the Made in China 2025 initiative? Is there any way that we can get them to go back a little from Belt and Road? Can we make it so that they say, you know what, we're going to approve American Express, we're going to approve JP Morgan? Can those things really happen?
Yes. Look, Jimmy, as part of the documents, and I can't go too deep into that, but as part of the documents, the de-emphasis of their 2025 and the significant reduction of China subsidies to those target industry is part of the documents, okay? That is so important because it gets to your point. And again, I'm sitting here talking to you all this morning. we have to have a sign-off, right, from President Xi and the China's, as I said, the Politburo, the top brass. But the documents are very clear. I mean, even things like a currency deal, Jimmy, you know, got no manipulation. They've got to report any interventions in the market. That's part of it. As you know, yesterday, Mr. Lighthizer announced before Congress that we were suspending the 25% tariff on the $200 billion of goods and services, a suspension for now, awaiting the China's response. We have never gone this far. We have never covered so much ground. And it's a question now of waiting for the other side to come back and say, you know, shall we say, sign on the dotted line. And I've been a realist. I've been on the network. Sometimes I've been so realistic, the market has fallen on this. Right now, we have just moved further, specifically, across the board. And I'm not sure people get that. I mean, they should. That's part of my message.
You know, wow. I mean, I got to tell you, this is so much more hopeful in terms of for both countries. And I wanted to ask you, Larry, has it mattered that our country's numbers are getting stronger and stronger, whereas China had export figures last night worse than 10 years, manufacturing worse than 3 years? Does it play a role that one country is ascending and that another country seems to have a harder time and really needs us perhaps more than they thought maybe 6 months ago?
I think that's a fair assessment. I think I heard you say that earlier on Squawk Box. I think that's a very accurate assessment. And I think there's two parts to it, Jim. One is China has in the last, 10 years moved away, maybe 15 years, moved away from their market-based reforms during what I'll call the Deng Xiaoping period, which was principally the 80s and the 90s. This decade, they've moved away from those reforms. They've become more centralized, more dictatorial, more control, more central planning, if you will, more socialist. And the free enterprise reforms have been knocked out. So that's hurt their economy. And if you run a chart, go back 20 years, you'll see it. Business investment has faltered. Retail sales have faltered, and so forth and so on. Secondly, I think President Trump, his tariffs really hurt China. Okay, it came at a bad time for China. Cyclically, they came at a bad time, but I think the tariffs really hurt. And I will say this, again, I'm the free trader in the building. One thing I've learned from President Trump is that tariffs can be a very fierce, strong negotiating tool. And in this case, I think it's a great illustration, to be honest. Mr. Trump wants to see free, fair, and reciprocal trade deals. And ultimately, he believes we should have zero tariffs and non-tariff barriers and subsidies. But to get from here to there, everything's fair in love and war. And I think the tariffs have had a bad effect on China's economy. And yes, I do think it brought them to the table. But I want to give the Chinese credit. I've been involved in these negotiations. I've been in office about a year. The vice premier, Liu He, and his top deputies worked very well with us. In those last 3 or 4 days in the extended weekend. So there seems to be goodwill, and there seems to be phenomenal progress.